Hello class, today we're going to talk about the food chain. The objective of this lesson is for you as a student to learn about the three main parts of the food chain, as well as be able to explain how all living things depend directly or indirectly on green plants for food. Starting off this PowerPoint, you can see this picture up here in the top left corner. It shows that the food chain is a never-ending thing. It's always rotating back onto itself, and thus it never ends. On to the next slide is just a hierarchy of the food chain. Starting at the bottom with decomposers, some examples here are mushrooms and worms. Centipedes is also another example they include. Next on your hierarchy is primary producers. These are plants, so trees, bushes, anything of that sort. They use photosynthesis to create their food. Next on your hierarchy is primary consumers. These are herbivores. Their examples include that bird there, a squirrel, and insects. Next up, you have their secondary consumers, which are also known as omnivores, and their examples are that frog and snake. Lastly, on the hierarchy is the very top. They call this the tertiary consumers, and their example is that fox there. We will be getting more in depth into all of these throughout this lesson, but here's just a little touching on the hierarchy. That way you guys have a picture that you can think back to. First up is decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that break down dead or decaying organisms. In doing so, they carry out the natural processes of decomposition. Decomposers consume dead plants and animals and reduce them to simpler forms of matter. Just some good, solid primary decomposers there is fungi and bacteria. They're very good decomposers. Next up is your producers. Being a producer means that you make your own food. Plants are producers. So down in the bottom right there you can see a few examples of producers. Obviously sunflower, a tree, they have a cactus there. These are organisms that utilize solar or chemical energy to synthesize starch. They use energy from the sun, and by using CO2 from the air and water they produce glucose through photosynthesis. If you guys are familiar at all with the photosynthesis equation, you know that sun and CO2 combine and they come out with a glucose or food for themselves in a starch form. Next up is consumers. These are organisms that eat other organisms. There are three main types of of consumers. They range anywhere from, as you can see there in the bottom right, a lion to a squirrel. The first type being a herbivore. These are animals that only eat plants. Second up is your carnivore, animals that only eat meat. And third up is your omnivore, or animals that eat both plants and meat. A little more in depth on each of these three. So first up is your primary consumers. These are also known as herbivores and animals that just eat plants. Herbivores have wide flat teeth and are adapted to grinding grass, tree bark, and other tough plant material. A good Wyoming example there is that deer. Also horses, you see a lot of those around here. Up at the top right, you'll see the teeth that I was talking about there. This is from a black-tailed deer, so not very different from the deer you see around Wyoming here. As you can see, they're very flat, very adapted to just grind up that grass. Next up is your secondary consumers. These are also known as omnivores. These are animals that eat plants and meat both. Some examples here are obviously a bear. A bird is also considered an omnivore just because they eat things like grain and worms, so they're eating both plants and meat. The teeth structure of an omnivore, in something like a bear, in the front there you can see those teeth that are used to rip up that meat, and those are the sharp teeth. And then in the back there you can see those flat teeth like we just saw in the primary consumers, which are used to eat the plants and grind up that material. Next up is your tertiary consumers, so the very top of your hierarchy. These are carnivores, and these are animals that only eat meat. They're known as predators, and these often hunt by ambush rather than pursuit. So obviously you're not going to see a lion many times just try to chase down a gazelle. They know they're slower, they know they won't win that battle, so they're going to try to sneak up on them, and that's how they get their food. Wyoming example there in the bottom right, a wolf. You guys are all probably familiar with those. And in the top right, you can kind of see the teeth structure generally of what a tertiary consumer would look like. As you can see, they don't really have those back flat teeth like your secondary consumers had. They're all pretty sharp. They're just used to rip up meat, and since they only eat meat, that makes sense. All of you guys will actually be making your own PowerPoint tomorrow in class after watching this video. You will be choosing a country outside of the United States from around the world, and you will be expected to make a food chain. In this presentation, I will expect you guys to have every part of this hierarchy, and you will be using only plants and animals from your specific country. So this will show us in the class, everything will come back to one thing in this hierarchy, and you'll realize that all things come back to one thing. So hope you enjoyed the lesson.